Hello, boys and girls. Now we're going to learn about U.S. history. All right. So the deal is you live in America with your family. Luckily, you don't need to think about dictators telling you what to do unless it's your parents. Yes, I know you have to go to school now, but later you can choose the kind of life you want. Sometimes people take our democracy and our government for granted and don't think about how it got created. These slides are going to give you a quick overview. So, once upon a time, most of the world was ruled by kings and queens. You should remember that people over in England settled here, but they were still ruled by the English king. Due to the Enlightenment ideas of having a fair government, the colonists revolted against the English king, and we have the American Revolution. We won the war, and now our leaders have to decide what kind of government we need to implement in the place of having a king. And that's what these slides are going to explain today. At first, our leaders created the Articles of Confederation. So this was an agreement among the 13 original states that established the United States of America and served as its first agreement on how we should be ruled. But the problem was there was no strong central power, and each state acted independently of other states, so there was no unified voice. The states argued among themselves, they each printed their own money, there was no stable economy. This was not working. So the first thing that our leaders did, they said, let's make one strong national government that can make the major decisions for our country, but also protect all the things that the states wants. So the national government was divided into 3 separate branches where there would be a system of checks and balances. Everyone would work together and no one branch would have too much power. So the 3 branches are the executive branch, which is the president and his cabinet, who we vote for every 4 years. The judicial branch is made of the Supreme Court, which makes sure all the laws are constitutional. And the 3rd branch is the legislative, which is made up of elected officials from each state sent to Washington, D.C. to argue for laws that would help each of the states. So, if you feel there should be a new law, people should be able to vote, maybe finish school, join the Army at 16 years old. Do you personally have time to go and speak with the president, and does he have time to talk to everybody about what people want? Probably not. Or I know he doesn't, but I wish he did. But anyway, that's why we all get to vote to send someone to represent us to go to Washington, D.C. to work with other leaders and the president. So the thing is, how do we make sure that every state is represented fairly? So we got a system that was implemented where each state got a certain number of representatives based on their population. But the smaller states, they're worried. Is this fair? Would their wishes get ignored by the larger, more powerful states? So we got together, and this is how we have the Great Compromise. It created the Senate and the House of Representatives to answer this issue. So here's the deal. The legislative branch has 2 houses, the Senate and House of Representatives. The Senate is populated with 2 senators from each state, no matter how big or small the state is. The membership of the House of Representatives is based on how many people live in that state. Together with the president, they work together to make laws and govern the country. So how many states do we have? If there are 2 senators per state, how many senators we have? I hope you're figuring that out in your head and you can do it. So let's move on to the House of Representatives. As we know, this was based on population. So for instance, California, our wonderful state, has the most people living in it. So we get to send the most representatives, 55, to Washington, D.C., whereas Oregon has a lot less people. They only get to send 7 people. However, Oregon gets the same amount of senators as California. All states get 2 senators. Here's an example of some of the different states and the number of people they can send to Washington, D.C. Now, another thing that had to be taken into consideration, at this time when this was decided, America had slavery. Now, slaves weren't allowed to vote, but the less populated southern states saw this as an opportunity to get more representation in Congress by asking that the slaves be counted as part of the state residents. This would not only help states get the things they wanted more easily, but would help the southern states fight a lot harder against the abolition of slavery. So the agreement came about that one slave, or rather 5 slaves, would count as 3 residents. This was called a 3/5 rule. What do you think about that? Crazy, huh? So now the Constitution is in place. However, there are 2 different views about this document. One group was called the Federalists. They were a group who said, we like the Constitution, we want a strong central government, we don't want any changes. The other group, called the Anti-Federalists, they were more worried about farmers, the less powerful people, losing a lot of their civil liberties, and why they wanted to make sure they were protected. This led to making the Bill of Rights, which addressed most of their concerns. Some of the things this protected were the right to speak freely, even if it was against the government. It gave people the right to write whatever they wanted in newspapers, known as the freedom of the press. So some of the things the Bill of Rights protected was the right to speak freely, as we said, even if it was against the government. Can you imagine there's places in the world today where if you complain about the government, you are thrown in jail. So these were very important rights that were added. So even though there were 10 amendments in the original bill, I'm just going to talk about the next 3. We just talked about 1. I know that even though we're only talking about 3, that you can learn about the rest of them yourself. So don't forget to look them up in your history book. So as far as the Second Amendment, what was going on is in the 1700s, everyone had to wear long sleeves. So with this amendment, people were able to walk in public with their arms showing. This led to the invention of the T-shirt. This is known as the right to bear arms. Just kidding. The Second Amendment was the right to bear arms, allowed people to own guns, even though they were not in the military. The Third Amendment was created because under King George, British soldiers were allowed to just move into the colonists' houses if they wanted when he was in control. But now if you find soldiers who want to be in your house, you get to charge them rent. So what have you learned? Please answer questions on your worksheet that are included and a summary of the main points you've learned. And write down anything that's maybe confusing, and I hope you enjoyed this little lesson.